In this video, I'm going to talk about the design and layout of the cell block. The cell block sits at the top of Alcatraz Island, and as you can see in this picture, it's a pretty massive structure. In fact, when the building was constructed and dedicated in 1912, it was the largest concrete structure in the world. Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Turner oversaw the designs and construction of the cell block. Turner planned the building with cell blocks placed internally in an I shape with a concrete walkway separating the cell blocks from each other, and also walkways separating cell blocks from the outer walls of the building. These island cell blocks had 2 rows of cells and were 3 tiers high. This design of the island created the perception that Alcatraz was escape proof. In order to escape, an inmate would have to first escape from their cell, then find a way to escape from the cell house. If an inmate managed to do this, they would still have to cross the bay, and not many people thought that this was possible. As we look at this diagram, I'll talk a little bit about the interior of the building, but first I'll identify these markers. So to start with, there's no marker here, but here is the exterior of the main entrance to the administration portion of the building. So as we look at the section here, 1, 2, and 3 are located within the administrative part. You wouldn't have had a lot of inmate contact. Maybe a handful of the most trusted inmates would ever find themselves in here, aside from being escorted into the building maybe on arrival. The odds are most likely that on arrival they would have come in either through this or possibly an exterior door, maybe the rec yard, but probably in this back area. But regardless, number one here locates a sally port and a metal detector for that purpose if necessary. 2 is the armory. The rest of this will be administrative offices. The warden's office would be back here. 3 is the visitation room. Here's a little window. Here's a better picture of a visitation window. So non-contact visits would have been the only type of visit allowed. Most inmates probably wouldn't have had visits. That's probably true still today. Most inmates don't get regular visits. But based on the design and purpose of the island, the inmate list or the visitation list for inmates would have been really limited. Probably wouldn't have let a whole lot of people in. Today, you have more of an opportunity to visit inmates and get approved to be on a list. Here, we would have really restricted who was going to be allowed into the prison to visit these inmates. So that was the visitation room. 4 is the library. So we'll talk about the cell blocks here in a second, but the library here is at the end of D block. The library was known to read anything that that would have been deemed inappropriate. We still, to some extent, limit what inmates have access to, but they would have had a lot of censorship at this time period. So they would have been allowed to check out books, and there's a lot of information out there about inmates in Alcatraz being above average IQ and being really well read. 5 over here, this is A block, so in order, as we look at the main entrance, starting from the right, A block, B block, C block, and D block. D block is going to be known as a treatment wing or segregated block. There's going to be 1 row of cells, and then you kind of tell this solid black line rather than an additional row of cells on the opposite side of the utility corridor or pipe chase. There's just a concrete wall that separates it from the remaining cell block. So this is an isolation unit on the first floor, bottom tier, sometimes called the flats. Cell 19 through 14 would have been severe isolation. You might hear colloquial term referred to the hole. These would have been, instead of barred cell doors, these would have been solid steel doors that put inmates in complete um, darkness. The rest of the inmates, even though they're not in the isolated cells, they are going to be in cell 24 hours a day. They would have had maybe some rec time, maybe shower once a week or so, but the remainder of their time being spent in the cell. So on B and C, so there's this really interesting thing about A block. Um, Here's a view down A block, and it's really hard to tell in in this particular photo. I'm going to pull up this photo here. When the federal government took over the I said federal government, but when the Department of Justice took over Alcatraz Island from the War Department, the cells in B and C and D were all retrofitted and tool-hardened bars that would have been hard to saw through. You couldn't have manipulated them with tools, but they didn't do that with A, and you can kind of tell here. You can see these flat bars compared to, here's a cell that has the tool-hardened bars, and they're the kind of bar you expect to see in a prison. So these flat bars weren't replaced in A block. So A block was very rarely used to house inmates. There would have been some very short-term stays potentially, but most of these cells, if used at all, would have been used for things like storage, administrative offices. They would not have been used as a regular cell block. So these are not going to be occupied for the majority of the time. There is, though, at the end of A block here, this outer exit, right at the end of the block would be the inmate barber shop. I don't have a great picture of the barber shop. This would be at the end of A block, coming out here to the rest of B and C. So as we go back to the diagram here, I do want to point out a couple of things. So all of these B and C cell blocks, cells would have been approximately 5 feet by 9 feet, 7 feet high. And they basically have a sink, they have a sleeping cot, they have a toilet. They would have been able to put a little bit of personal touch on it, but there's not a whole lot of other personal property or furniture items, things like that. The average man in these cells would probably be able to reach all the way across and touch both walls, or at least get pretty close. I want to point out one interesting thing about Alcatraz, or the Cellhouse. They would have named, and inmates would have referred to these concrete walkways that separate the cell blocks after major American streets or landmarks. So the main corridor here that separates B and C was referred to as Broadway. This would have provided the least amount of privacy available for inmates because it was the main corridor. These Broadway cells, this is B block here, would have housed on the second tier mostly new inmates when they arrived. There's also some information that new inmates would have been kept down on the flats. Pretty typically, though, they would have been moved over on the second tier here. As a matter of fact, one of the interesting things about Alcatraz is there's not a lot of information about the most famous, I guess, inmate, Al Capone. We don't really know where his cell is. There is a B block cell that's attributed to him, and that's probably the first cell he stayed in while he was there. Otherwise, he's moved so many times. In the later parts, he would have been kept in the hospital building. So this idea that he has one designated cell is not part of the information we have. So, and that's not atypical. There's a lot of information about inmates moving often, having multiple different cells during their stay. and requesting moving up, down, around based on who's around them or things like that. So Broadway again is this main corridor, the walkway that separates A, A block, and B block. On the opposite side of Broadway would have been Michigan Avenue. Down this area, so as we move forward, so having identified that this is number 9, this is the mess hall or the dining room. One of the interesting things about the dining room is the nickname, what the inmates called it, would have been the gas chamber because of these gas cylinders that are spread out around the building that could remotely send gas into the dining room if there was a riot or a disturbance. But that walkway, this kind of area at the end of Broadway where inmates would congregate before moving systematically into the dining hall, was known as Times Square. So here's the dining cell entrance. You can see the bars to the kitchen, the menu up on the board there. This space up here, and I got a better picture of that. This is a gun gallery, and there's 2 of them. So going back to our diagram, there's a gun gallery here and gun gallery here, and that's exactly what it sounds like, where the armed guards wouldn't have walked down here on the floor, but you would have had an opportunity to utilize deadly force within the cell block if necessary. So on going back to the quote unquote street names, so Broadway, Michigan Avenue. So the sometimes the D block corridor, which is kind of encased within this concrete room, is called the Sunset Strip. We have not a American landmark or anything, but between C and D Street would have eventually been known as CD Street. And sometimes when you're saying it quickly, it becomes CD Street. So that's what it would have been known as, CD Street. Down here toward the very end, we can see they have these cells would have been known as Park Avenue. And part of that is because of the sun coming in through the windows would have warmed up these cells a little more than some of the others in the cell block. So that would have been some prime real estate at the end of C block on CD Street. So within the rest of the interior, there's a couple of things that I don't really have pictures of. I'll start with 10. I have a picture of the kitchen area. So you'll notice the knives and the silhouettes here, so we can know exactly what knife is missing or where it's being used. Despite these type of security measures, there would be stabbings on Alcatraz Island. And then back to our diagram. So it's not pictured here, and I don't have a photo of it, but above the dining hall you can see these staircases. They would have gone to the hospital wing above the dining room. Below the cell block here, there would have been a basement level. There would have been the clothing room. There would have been a shower room. There would have been some storage and things like that. So as we close out, I want to look at just a last thing on this diagram. I showed the introductory picture. This door right here, and I don't have a great photo that shows it, but on the wall here, or on this end of the building where this gun gallery, so this is this gun gallery here, right down here. So this is the wall that goes into D block. You can see this door here. Right here on this exterior wall would be the door to the rec yard. So this exterior door comes down, and I showed this photo at the beginning that shows the opposite way. So if you walk up these stairs and then squeeze in between that wall and the cell block. You would walk in that door back into the cell block. And this is how inmates would have come to and from the new industries building that I showed in a previous video. They would have walked through the rec yard and then back through the rec yard into that entrance here, coming down CD Street and then back to wherever their cell was.